firearms, freedom. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran. This is episode 14. Thank you for downloading, subscribing, and listening. Got a really interesting show for you today, very informative show. First, we'll take a look at a rather offensive article from Gawker. Apparently they think old folks are just too weak and feeble to use guns for self-defense, but we're going to prove them wrong with some examples. Hillary Clinton seems to think that firearms manufacturers should be held liable for gun violence, but is that really sensible? We'll take a look at the logic behind shielding the firearms industry from frivolous lawsuits. And if you've listened to the show previously, you know that I recently started hand-loading my own ammunition. So I thought I would bring in an expert to give us some of the ins and outs, the do's and don'ts for newcomers to hand loading. Josh Ruby of North Texas Rifle Precision will be joining us. All that and more coming up on Armed Lutheran Radio.
The National Rifle Association's Eddie Eagle has taken that message to more than 15 million kids nationwide through a program endorsed by dozens of governors and state legislatures. And gun accident rates today are the lowest ever recorded. For 130 years, we've worked to put safety and freedom first. I'm Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.
I am still trying to decide what to make of this article that I ran across. I don't know what Gawker.com is exactly. I can't decide whether they are serious or satire or just intentionally offensive or some combination of the three. There's an article I ran across on Gawker by somebody named Hamilton Nolan. And Hamilton apparently is big on doing old people news where he makes fun of old people. Other articles that he's penned include Old People Gonna Be Dying More from Heat. Another one, Old Man Cannot Figure Out What's Happening, where he makes fun of a writer at the Wall Street Journal. And then another one, Deluded Elderly Bask in the Intoxicating Musk of Looming Death. So that just to set the stage and give you an idea of what this guy's written about old people. And again, at first, I thought this was satire. And then I saw the comments, and I'm not sure. The name of the article is, Guns Won't Protect You, Old People. You're Too Old and Weak. And it goes something like this. We live in scary times. Sharia law, foreigners, and rape gangs haunt the streets of this once great nation. Some old people believe that they must arm themselves in order to find peace and safety. Wrong. Old people, wrong. Want to find safety? Can you even find the safety on a handgun you've purchased? Probably not very quickly with your poor eyesight and fingers ravaged by arthritis. The Wall Street Journal reports that interest in guns among retirees is booming. In just the last 5 years, more old people are buying guns, training with guns, and cupping their hands over their ears to try to hear whether the instructor at their gun safety course said shoot or stop. In this day and age when you have Obama, ISIS, and Chief Keef, you, an elderly American, are thinking seriously about getting yourself a gun for protection. Might as well get yourself a dragon or a unicorn trained to be your bodyguard. That would help you just as much. When you're old, you're slow as hell, and decades of muscle erosion have made you weak. Pretty much any healthy young person can beat you up. Is a gun gonna even things out? Nope. In order for that gun to work, you have to pull it out and aim it in a moment of crisis. While you're fumbling to do that, all slow, a young person is just pushing you to the ground and taking your gun out of your feeble hands. Leave the guns to the young nuts, oldie. And it gets worse from there. Hamilton Nolan apparently believes this stuff, and clearly he doesn't know jack squat about guns and self-defense. I mean, listen to some of this. I'll lay 5-to-1 odds that any street criminal can kick you in the knee and chuckle as you roll around on the ground, grasping for the gun you dropped, as they rifle through your purse and then steal your gun too. That gun you bought will end up in a pawn shop before you ever get to blow a hole in one of those disrespectful young menaces. Were you to somehow squeeze off a shot in the course of being attacked, it's as likely as not that you'd shoot yourself in the knee replacement as shoot the bad guy. It's time to wake up and realize that though your irrational, age-induced fear of the outside world may be here to stay, so is your physical inability to defend yourself. Your reflexes are faded as hell, so you might as well learn to get along with people. Who do you think you are, Charles Bronson? Well, all it took me was 5 minutes of surfing YouTube to find these examples of oldies kicking little young punks' butts. So, take this. February 2014. Dayton, Ohio, elderly store owner shoots armed bank robbers. He was facing 3 of them. January 2013, Tucker, Georgia, oldster shoots a burglar who had just broken into his house and stole one of his shotguns. April 2013, 80-year-old Army veteran shoots an intruder breaking into his house. February 2013, 86-year-old Louise Howard shoots a home invader. April 2014, wife of elderly World War II veteran shoots and kills home invader in Hamilton County, Ohio. And facing the teen intruder, her unarmed husband told the guy with the knife to go to hell. So how's that for tough oldsters? April 2014, Jefferson County, Alabama, elderly man confronts and shoots home invaders. April 2013, 66-year-old Maple Valley, Washington man shoots 2 burglars. September 2012, 92-year-old Verona, Kentucky World War II vet shoots and kills an intruder with a .22 rifle. So don't give me this crap about how old people can't defend themselves. Have a little respect. The fact of the matter is that not all men are made equal. And obviously, when it comes to physical skills, physical strength, older Americans are not as physically capable as younger ones. But guns, to paraphrase Samuel Colt, are the great equalizer. And this brief list of examples that I found in 5 minutes of YouTube surfing prove the point that Hamilton Nolan at Gawker doesn't know jack about the old people he writes about or about guns.
Remember, Armed Lutheran Radio comes with a 100% satisfaction guarantee. If you are not completely satisfied, the next episode is free.
Hi, I'm Taya Kyle, author and veteran family activist. The outdoor lifestyle is one that Chris and I enjoyed together and wanted to expose our children to. Support the organization preserving this lifestyle for future generations. Join the NRA today.
I absolutely hate this current presidential campaign. All of the Never Trump stuff and all of the Trump's stupidity in attacking personally all of his opponents has divided the Republican Party in such a way that I don't know how it's going to be put back together, and we've lost sight of who the real enemy is. And to give you a taste of what we may be running into, this week, Hillary Clinton tweeted her support for the idea of holding gun companies liable for harming children the same way that we hold toy companies liable. The threat of civil liability is what keeps manufacturers honest in terms of the quality of the products they manufacture. They're not going to produce a product that could harm someone accidentally, and if they do, they're quick to recall those products. The same is true of the firearms industry. The gun companies are not immune from lawsuits stemming from manufacturer defects or criminal behavior on their part in terms of what they manufactured or who they sell to. What they are immune from, however, is frivolous lawsuits, which are really just trying to hold the gun companies liable for the criminal misuse of their products. Now, in 2005, George W. Bush signed the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. And that basically, despite what Hillary and liberal rags like the New York Times and Salon claim, it doesn't shield gun companies from civil liability related to actual defective products in the same way that toy companies can be held liable. What it does is it prevents lawsuits that are really only intended to put gun companies out of business. Now, it doesn't mean that gun companies are immune from all liability. If a defective firearm injures a shooter, the victim and the victim's families can sue the manufacturer. Gun companies are very proactive when it comes to defects. Just about every gun company out there has, at one time or another, has had product safety recalls, from Colt to Winchester, from Browning to Ruger. Every one of them have had at least one product that they've had to recall for safety reasons. I mentioned last week in my segment with Pastor Bennett the Caracal recalls. Those were single incidents, or just one of them. The first one I don't even think was reported by. I think it was just an anecdotal report of drop safety not engaging. And the possibility existed that the guns might, discharge if dropped. So they didn't take any chances, and they recalled all of them, replaced them, or refunded your money. They don't take any chances about that stuff because they're not immune from civil liability. The PLCAA, it prevents anti-gun groups from suing Bushmaster, for example, because one of their rifles was misused at Sandy Hook. It prevents Ruger from being sued because one of their products was misused at Virginia Tech. It prevents High Point from being sued because its line of inexpensive handguns are used in crimes. What it does is it prevents anti-gun groups from trying to engage in lawsuits intended solely to destroy the firearms industry. Rather than focusing on fighting crime or getting criminals off the streets, we'd rather open up manufacturers of legal products to be sued because they could be used by criminals. It's also a nice little sop to the trial lawyers who are big Democrats, to allow them to engage in these massive lawsuits, and really not in hopes of actually winning the lawsuits, but hoping they can force the manufacturers to settle out of court for large payouts, and ultimately hoping that it damages the firearms industry. Well, if we're going down that road, if this really is about safety and not just a backdoor attempt to destroy the firearms industry, then we need to be consistent. You remember the story I brought you in episode 10 about the guy who got high on heroin, beat his kid to death with an Xbox controller? Should we be holding Microsoft liable? Should the kid's family be allowed to sue Microsoft? What about the company that made the car, driven by the woman who plowed into that homecoming parade at Oklahoma State? She killed 4 people and injured 44 more. Should that car company be held liable? Should we be able to sue the dealership? Should those 48 people and their families, should they be able to engage in a class action lawsuit against, I don't remember what kind of car it was. It wasn't listed in the articles that I saw, but the video, it looked like it might have been a Honda or a Hyundai. Should those companies be sued? Or the dealership who sold her the car? Maybe rope manufacturers, maybe hemp farmers should be liable for the deaths of, those who commit suicide by hanging themselves. Maybe we should be suing Schick or the Dollar Shave Club every time some suicidal teenager cuts their wrists. Maybe we should be suing the manufacturers of bathtubs and swimming pools and the companies that install them for not doing background checks on the people they install the pools and the tubs. And maybe we should sue those people every time somebody drowns. Every time a child drowns, we should maybe sue the swimming pool manufacturer. What do you think? Those who support lawsuits against gun companies say it's a way to force the companies or the dealers to take precautions to prevent sales to criminals. But that doesn't make any sense considering the circumstances, considering the events, the shootings that we're talking about. It's already illegal to buy a gun for somebody else if that person's legally prohibited from owning a gun. Take Sandy Hook as an example here. I mean, guns were not owned by or even sold to the killer. They were legally purchased, legally owned by the killer's mom, and they were stolen when her son killed her before going to that school. So how does a lawsuit against Bushmaster prevent that from happening again? It doesn't. Maybe we should sue car dealers so they'll be more careful about who they sell cars to. Maybe the victims of the 9/11 hijackings should be able to sue the airlines because they sold tickets to a bunch of foreign Muslims. Maybe that's what we need to do. Oh, no, can't do that. That's politically incorrect. Should the manufacturers of the planes be held liable because they were used as weapons? Well, maybe we should extend this concept to government. Maybe we should remove the liability protections that government enjoys. Well, I don't know. Maybe the family of Brian Terry should be able to sue the ATF or the Department of Justice or Eric Holder for their role in selling Mexican drug cartels the weapons which were used to kill Brian Terry, one of our Border Patrol agents. Maybe we should allow the parents and the families of the U.S. citizens killed in Benghazi to sue the Secretary of State, who did nothing to save them, who denied their requests for more security, and who then lied to their faces and lied to the American people about what really happened. Maybe. It's just a thought. If we're going to go down that road, let's at least be consistent about it.
If you carry a gun for personal protection, it's imperative that you get a good holster. When I started out, I had no idea what that meant, and I went through a bunch of really bad holsters. Then I found Cook's Holsters at cooksholsters.com. Cook's Holsters are custom made to fit your specific firearm. Available in lots of colors, including custom printed Kydex. Cook's Holsters are made in the USA and the great state of Georgia and come with a lifetime warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Visit www.cooksholsters.com and use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and get a 15% discount off everything in the store. You put a lot of time and money into the firearm you choose to carry for personal protection. Carry it in the best holster. cooksholsters.com.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. As I mentioned a couple of episodes back, I got the reloading bug and bought myself a progressive press. I've learned a lot thanks to Sergeant Bill Silvia's help, but it occurred to me that, there's a lot of shooters out there who are like me, just getting started or thinking about getting into reloading, and they don't have a Bill Silvia to lean on for information. So I thought I'd bring us an expert to talk about the ins and outs of getting started in reloading. Josh Ruby is the owner and operator of North Texas Rifle Precision, and he's teaching long-range rifle shooting, and he's got several classes that he teaches on reloading, including rifle, hunting rifle, and pistol reloading classes. Josh, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your background, your experience in shooting and reloading, and give us an idea of what North Texas Rifle Precision is all about.
Sure. Most of my high-volume shooting started with 5 years in a military police corps with the U.S. Army. When I got out, I started heavily reloading and shooting competitions. I've been shooting competitions since about 2003, I believe.
Wow.
And then as I progressed in it, I started helping other people. And then in 2009, I started North Texas Rifle Precision, and I've been teaching ever since then. I specialize in private one-on-one training, custom tailored training. I'll do small groups as well, like for a family or a couple of friends that want to take a course. But mainly everything I do is one-on-one, so I can cover a lot of information very quickly.
Right.
And it's all tailored to the actual client.
Very good. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Well, so the first question that people are like me were thinking about when they're probably thinking, I know I was thinking this right before I took the leap. Why do it? Why not just buy factory ammo and avoid the hassle? What are the advantages of hand loading your own ammunition?
Well, a lot of it just depends on how much you shoot. As far as why reload, if you're somebody that just hunts and shoots half a box a year, there's really no advantage to reload. If you're somebody that shoots often or is trying to get the most accuracy they can out of a rifle, or actually any type of firearm, it's best to reload, because all these different firearms are kind of like fingerprints. They're all different, and you can find a load that does well in all of them, but to really get the best load, it's always going to be almost a different load in each different type of weapon that you have.
Gotcha.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So how much money am I going to save? I know that's the next question.
Well, I get asked this a lot, and it just depends on how much you're going to get into it. I mean, once you have the initial cost of the kind of what I call like the buy-in, I mean,
right.
The equipment itself is going to cost you, several $100s. You can get lower kits, like a Lee Anniversary kit. It will still make ammunition fine for you. If you start getting up into the higher end, the Redding and the Foresters and stuff like that, it's going to cost you a little bit more. So, if you're going into it to save money, there's ways to do it. I'm a little more focused into creating the best ammunition that we can.
Right.
So normally I'm using a little the higher end equipment and so forth. Once you have it, and then once you have your components, then really all you got to worry about is just buying your projectiles and your powder and your primers.
Right.
And so I can't give you the number you're going to save. You just got to do the, how much do I shoot per year versus, what I want to spend on the equipment.
I've heard people say that, well, you really won't save money because you'll end up shooting more.
That's exactly right. It's one of these, when you first start shooting, you don't want to shoot them because, they're your little trophies you put together in the box, and then after you get that out of your system, and then now you just want to go bang steel and increase the volume that you shoot. So,
right.
Trust me, everybody follows that same pattern.
Yep. Yeah, there was something really interesting. There's a different feeling that first time you go out to the range and you chamber around and you fire it and you think, I just shot ammunition that I made myself. There's something really a special feeling about that. It's not like anything that I'd experienced before shooting. It was kind of neat.
It's a huge sense of accomplishment in my long range rifle classes. Not only do you just shoot the ammo that you made, but you'll actually engage at least to 1,000 yards of the ammo you made the day before.
Oh, wow. I got to give that a try.
Yeah, come on out.
All right. So once you've made the decision and you've decided to take that leap, what's the first thing you got to buy?
First thing, well, really, you need to make sure you buy, a reloading manual. Most of these kits are going to come with one. Keep in mind, if you buy a reloading manual that's made by a specific bullet manufacturer, they're going to focus on their bullets, So
right.
Yeah, so if you're shooting Nosler bullets, you may not want to get a Sierra manual. The best scenario is just to have a whole bunch of different books because they all have different information in them.
Okay.
And their load data is going to be different than the other ones. A lot of the books have had the information kind of watered down because we live in a litigious society now, and they don't want to publish what the real max pressure is. They would kind of want to keep you away from that.
Right.
But definitely a book that you have something to reference to. And then, of course, you need the equipment. Any of the major kits will get you going out the door. Just understand that you're still going to spend money later on down the road when you find different equipment you're going to want to supplement your gear with.
Okay.
Now, once you get the kit, you still have the added, expense of you've got to buy your dies, your shell holders. Most of them don't come with a micrometer, which you'll need for, measuring both your overall length of your projectiles and also determining, the dimensions of your chamber and so forth, to know where you want to seat that projectile. There's a lot of advanced things that you'll end up learning as you're teaching yourself. If you come to me, basically I'll show you everything you need, and I'll teach you how to do it all, and it'll leapfrog you about 2 years into the process.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've been doing it for a long time, and I've got a pretty good streamlined course. And once you're done, you know everything as far as measuring your chamber, where to seat off the lands. Lands being the beginning of your rifling, will actually measure that gap to where the bullet jumps and stuff like that to get the most accuracy out of a rifle.
Great.
Yeah.
So if you're Getting back to the book,
Sure.
give us some recommendations off the shelf. The for a starting, first time reloader.
If I were going to get one book, first time reloader, I would get the Lyman book, the Lyman's newest edition.
49th, I think.
I believe so.
Yep, that's the one I got. Okay, good.
Yeah, that's the one I found has had the most well-rounded information in it. So.
Gotcha. Okay, so there's obviously different presses.
Mm-hmm.
What do you recommend for a first time reloader? Progressive press, single stage. Which brand do you recommend? What are the differences? What are the advantages?
I'll start with the single stage versus the auto progressive.
Mm-hmm.
I would recommend a first time reloader to start on a single stage.
Okay.
The reason being, and just to explain to your audience, an auto progressive press is a large press with multi stations, and as you're pulling the handle, it's ejecting loaded ammunition. There's a lot of stuff going on in an auto progressive press for a first time reloader to, one, know what to look for,
mm-hmm.
and two, make sure it's happening. Especially like when you're dealing with loading for pistol, it's mm-hmm. common to do what's called a double charge, where you throw in twice the powder on accident.
Right.
That will cause a catastrophic disassembly in your pistol if that happens. So
right.
Yeah, and
right.
the priming systems can be a little touchy, and it's not impossible. I mean, I've had people learn on an auto progressive machine, but I'm more comfortable with someone learning on a single stage and mm-hmm. learning how to do each step manually and get that one down before they try to automate the process.
Gotcha. I started out with, I got a Leload Master, and mm-hmm. setting it up, I spent time before I installed instead of installing all the stages, I installed them one at a time and played with them one at a time until I got some, familiarity with it, kind of understood what it was doing and how it worked, and was satisfied that it was working the way it was supposed to before I installed the next one, then played with that one. So I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah, that's a good process. You basically just single stage your auto progressive until you figure it out each stage. So,
right.
Good.
Yeah. I wanted to make sure I wasn't, having to keep an eye on 5 things at once. I just wanted to look at each one as I went to make sure that it was working before I turned the whole thing loose. And then you got a lot to keep up with.
Yeah, that's why they make lots of safety checks on there to. If you don't have a primer in one, that's not so bad. I mean, it's a pain, it won't go off. But if you either A, don't put powder in one, or B, double charge one, that could cause some headaches for you when you're at the range. Yes.
Right. In addition to the press, you mentioned things like a micrometer. What are some of the things? What are some of the things that just little additional things that you need to get that are essential to making sure that you're creating? Or you're able to check and make sure everything is up to spec and that it's not going to be dangerous running through your gun.
Some of the biggest things, and I'll kind of focus on the rifle. You're going to definitely want to get a micrometer. Mm-hmm. Generally, entering micrometer is going to give you the results you need, and of course, you want to make sure something measures down to 1,000th of an inch. Mm-hmm. You'll want headspace gauges to measure the headspace of the shoulder of your brass. You'll also want to get what's called a case gauge. It's a Hornady OAL gauge, and basically what that is a piece of brass for your chamber that has this device in the back that you actually put a projectile in the case, and then you'll push it against your lands, which is the start of your rifling, and then you'll lock out the depth gauge it has on it, and you'll measure that entire length so you know how long your chamber is.
Gotcha.
So that way you know where to seat your bullet off to get the most accuracy. And generally I find almost all competition rifles like to have the ogive or the shoulder of the bullet about 0.10 of an inch off the lands.
Okay.
So yeah, it's other things. You'll definitely want, the shell holders corresponding with the case set of the brass you're using.
Right.
And different things like that. Most of your kits are going to come with some type of manual powder thrower,
mm-hmm.
Which are good to have. But, I would recommend someone to also go with a digital thrower like an RCBS Charge Master or something like that.
Okay. Any differences in those requirements, whether you're shooting pistol or rifle?
No, you're still going to need the same micrometers and stuff to measure everything. You won't be using a overall length case gauge with the pistol, but there are chamber gauges and stuff that you can use to make sure that you're seating your projectiles to the right length.
Right.
The rifle sometimes can be a little more detail oriented than pistol.
I imagine.
Yes.
What are some of those measurements that you need to take, and what are the ramifications of getting it wrong?
Yeah, with the measurements, and again, we're dealing in thousandths of an inch.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times on a matched chamber, which is going to be a tighter chamber, in a shorter chamber, your length of your bullet's very critical, because if you're trying to get a 10,000ths jump or have 10,000ths of free bore, if you're not measuring correctly and you seat those bullets too long, and you head off to your next competition or you head off to your next hunt, and you go to close the bolt and the bolt doesn't close because your bullet's sticking against the lands, that's gonna be a problem.
That could be a problem.
Yeah. So you could always chamber check them before you go, but if you're measuring properly, you don't have to. So.
Okay, and once you check it once and you're good, or do you continually check and make sure that you're still getting the same results every time?
For a new reloader, I'd have them check pretty frequently. Once you get your system down, you're pretty much good to go. But you'll still have things come loose, like your die sometimes can come loose and walk on you. You just need to pay attention with your equipment. And one thing that I teach is, you do everything the same way every time. So that way, when something feels different on the press, you'll stop and figure out why does this feel different. And maybe my die came loose, or maybe something I got some kind of dirt or whatever. And the die is that's why you want to do everything the same way every time. Use the same force with your body on the ram and so forth. Because you want to be able to sense these little changes, or just get that gut feeling like, what was that? Something changed. Let me stop and see what's going on, So.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what components do you need to put a bullet together? How do you decide which ones to choose? Because there's so many different companies that make bullets. There's so many different companies that make powder. You can get brass from all over the place. How do you make those decisions?
Well, mine's going to be based on experience with different manufacturers of brass. There's some brass, it's going to be less expensive, but it's also going to be a softer type of brass. And when it's a softer brass, what will happen is, as you're firing, the primer pockets will loosen up quickly.
Okay.
There's two ways a piece of brass loses its life. It's either a split neck, which you can prevent by annealing, which is applying a heat source to restore the elasticity of the brass.
Okay.
Or when your primer pockets go loose. And if your primer pockets go loose, there's really nothing you can do, and now it's garbage.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And
when that happens, what's the result if your primer pockets are loose? What happens if will the primer simply not seat, or
it'll simply fall out? Sometimes you can have just enough resistance that it's in there, and then when you go to move it to your loading block, all of a sudden the primer falls out.
I got you.
When that happens, obviously you need to throw that piece of brass away.
Yeah. Because
you don't want primers falling out in your magazine.
No, that would not be good.
No.
Lead bullets, jacketed bullets, polymer coated. There's so many different bullet companies and types of bullets that you can get. What are the differences? Now I'm reloading for pistol, obviously, but so I'm not sure what are the differences when you're looking at pistol versus rifle. But based on those three types, lead, jacketed, polymer coated, what are the advantages? What's the difference?
Well, the difference, obviously, a lead bullet or like a wad cutter is going to be molded lead. And then with a jacketed bullet, it's still going to have lead, but it's going to have that copper jacketing around it. And then with your polymer coatings, like your moly coatings, that's basically a coating that reduces the friction of the projectile going down the barrel as it's swaged through the lands and out the muzzle. Okay. I prefer copper jacketed bullets. One, I just don't want the exposure to the lead. I don't want the lead in the house with lead-based bullets, and they seem to perform where I want them to go. I don't really have anything against moly-coated bullets. Some people prefer them. I just use basic copper jacketed bullets, and some projectiles are going to be hollow point boat tails in certain competition rifles, and then other ones I use do have a polymer tip, like the Hornady AMAX. I shoot a lot of Berger hybrid and Hornady AMAX bullets. Gotcha.
Okay, so I'm assuming then that the jacketed is going to give you, in terms of accuracy, is there a difference between the three, really, or
not a whole lot?
Not a whole lot.
Well, a regular lead bullet, you're not going to get much accuracy out of that. That's going to be more for a pistol or some type of lead nosed hunting projectile.
Okay.
When it comes between a jacketed rifle round or the same jacketed one with the moly coating on it, accuracy wise, they're going to be fairly identical.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So you've got all these components. You've already mentioned the lead. They're all dangerous to some extent. You have the potential for explosion and the exposure to the lead. What precautions do you take in storing them, in handling them? What do you recommend there?
As far as the powder I have, I've got a small wall locker, and I've got a former reloading room where I teach classes. All that stuff's out of reach and up high. Also, too, the doors to my room have external locks, so kids can't get into it and so forth.
Right.
We always wear eye pro, especially when we're priming. In my experience, priming is really the most dangerous part of it, because if you put a little too much pressure on a primer that's not in your priming device correctly, you could cause it to detonate. I've never had one detonate. I'm never going to have one, but I know of people who've had detonations. And if you have a detonation in a autoprogressive press, a lot of times that'll set up the whole stack of primers you have in that feed tube.
Right.
And don't underestimate the power of a primer. You can get hurt from a primer.
I've seen or I've read some instances of primers, firing right up into the ceiling, or I'm trying to remember which press is it that actually has the tube where they stack one right on top of the other. Is that Dillon?
I believe it may be. Is it a blue press, a Dillon?
Yeah. And you set the primer off at the bottom, and they all go flying up out the top. So,
well, a lot of these hand presses with the feed trays are real popular. And in my classes, I teach them to handle this just like you had a pistol in your hand, because I've seen people when they go to press the ram, they actually kind of rotate that hand primer, and the mouth of the case is pointing at their face. And I'm like, you got to treat this like it's a handgun. You need to keep this pointed away, because if you do pop a primer, you don't want it going into your face. So
right.
we always wear eye pro. Even my little daughter, she knows she's got to put her eye pro on when she comes into the room and hangs out with me. She'll watch her bubble guppies while I'm cranking out rounds. So
little plug for the bubble guppies there.
Yeah, I guess so.
So if somebody is getting started and they want to set up a press where in their home, what's the safest place to do it? Obviously, especially if you got kids, that was always my concern. And one of the reasons that I didn't do it for so long was we didn't have a garage. We didn't have a shed or a place where I could set up a workbench. And I really didn't want to bring the stuff into the house. I had a very small house. We moved to Texas, got a garage. I have a space to put all that stuff in. Is that sort of, what do you recommend when you don't really have a whole lot of space to work with? What's the safest way to set this all up?
Well, I've seen all types of different setups. I've seen guys make a setup underneath their stairs. I've had other guys out in the garage. First of all, I guess the answer is wherever your wife's going to let you do it. So not everyone's fortunate enough to me to have a full formal room where I teach and stuff and have my equipment. But basically, you want it out of the way of any, kids or anywhere you're going to have any kind of exposure to flame or even an excessive amount of heat. I had a client one time loading for 308, and he had some IMR. And we loaded the ammo up, And we went to go shoot it, and it was just all over the place. And he tells me it was stored in his attic for the last 10 years.
Oh, nice.
So yeah,
Nice.
so obviously it with the Texas heat, it degraded the powder. So
Right. What's the best place to store powder and primers? I would think you want to keep them relatively cool.
yeah, I mean, in your garage, you'll get away with it. I wouldn't like it with the temperature swings we have in Texas, but if you have some type of locker you can have inside the house where they're just room temperature, they're fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We talked about brass earlier and what to look for. What to look for if the brass is beyond its useful life. Well, how many times generally can you reuse? If I go out and I take a brand new box of factory ammo and I shoot it and I pick up all my brass and take it home, how many more times could I possibly get use out of that brass?
If you're not annealing the brass, anywhere from like maybe 5 to 6, somewhere in there, and then you might start getting split case necks. Now, again, there's no absolutes in all this. Somebody might be going, well, I get 10 out of mine. Well, maybe you do. Another person gets 4. It just depends on what kind of load you're putting in, the pressures, and just how it's handled. If you're annealing, then that piece of brass will last as long as the primer pockets will stay tight enough to hold a primer.
Oh.
The best brass out there is Lapua, and obviously the best you're going to pay for it, but it'll last the longest. If I'm not using Lapua, then I try to get Winchester brass.
Okay.
It does really well for the price.
Okay. And
Yeah.
in addition to the split case necks, anything else, and the primers falling out, what else do you know? Because the brass deforms every time you
It
fire
does.
around. So what else should you look for to make sure that you're not reloading a potentially dangerous piece of brass?
If you don't have your shoulder set back right, or your shoulder bump, and what that is when the primer struck and then the powder ignites and starts to burn and create gas, and that gas presses the piece of brass against your chamber walls, pushes the projectile forward to the freeboard, hits the lands, and then it actually sways and shoves this bullet out the barrel because the projectile is slightly wider than the rifling. Once it does that, and it pushes that piece of brass against your chamber walls, once the pressure and gas subsides, then the brass will shrink back slightly to where it was on its original shape, but as it goes back to the original shape. One thing with that too is because you have to have this little bit of gap in the chamber so that your projectile actually goes in and you can close the bolt, is you have a little bit of space in front of your shoulder. And it's usually going to be about 0.02 of an inch. So when you fire, it blows your shoulder 4 0.02. So if you don't have your sizing die set up correctly and you're bumping the shoulder back excessively, say 4 to 5 thousandths every time, what happens is you end up getting what's called a case head separation, because as you're firing over and over, your brass is flowing forward, and it's flowing forward from just ahead of the case head in the body. And that'll become so thin that once you get to a certain point of weakness, you'll shoot and that case head will come off.
Oh,
yeah, and so that's called a case head separation. A lot of times that ends up with a stuck piece of brass. You'll see them a lot of times, during competitions. Sometimes you do have defective brass. We had a batch of that a couple of years, but generally it's because someone doesn't have their sizing die set up correctly, and they're over bumping that shoulder, which is causing excessive brass flow forward toward the chamber mouth.
okay.
Or chamber throat, excuse me.
Gotcha. All right, so that brings us to the big, I think the biggest question. What are what are the common mistakes that you see people making? What are the consequences of those mistakes? We talked about what you just talked about with the case head separation. We talked about primer pockets. We talked about double charging a case. What else do people need to be careful about, and what do you see people doing?
I'd say the biggest, most common mistake that I see is setting up the sizing die. And there's actually a few formal videos out there on YouTube and so forth that actually show it doing it wrong. So So the what you want to do when you set up your sizing die, and of course the sizer, I use full length sizers. You're trying to get your piece of brass back into spec, right? So it goes in chambers again. So the way you set a sizer up is you raise the ram all the way up, making sure you have your shell holder in the top of the ram. And then you'll turn that sizer all the way down until it touches the ram. Now, the way you adjust from here is you lift up and bring the ram down, and then you'll turn in downward again another eighth of a turn, so that when you bring the ram back up, it'll touch that die and do what's called a cam over, and you'll feel positive pressure against the bottom of it.
Okay.
What a lot of people do is they set it up the opposite way, is they'll run it all the way down to it touches, and they'll back it off that eighth of a turn. So a die in one full revolution is going to rotate 50 thousandths of an inch in movement up and down. So if you're trying to get a 2,000ths bump on this shoulder and you back it off an eighth, you're actually moving it from your 0 up to about 6 thousandths or so. I'm doing the math in my head real quick. Sorry. So you're coming off 6 thousandths there on 1/8 of a turn. And so what happens now is you fire, and then you run that piece of brass up. Well, it never touches the shoulder. And so the second firing, you might get away with it, kind of sticky, closing the bolt. And then by the third firing, once you run the sizer up and you know your charge, shoot your bullet, you go to close the bolt, all of a sudden now your bolt won't close. The most common thing people think is, I must have seated my bullets longer, and they'll go put their bullets in shorter, and then it still won't close. One of the most important tools any reloader should have on their bench is a big fat black Sharpie marker. Because at any time you think something's going on and something's not closing, you can take that Sharpie and color the entire bullet from the tip to the case head with that Sharpie, and then throw it in your chamber, try to close a bolt, and then pull it back out, and where the Sharpie's rubbed off, that's where your sticking point is. So it's rubbed off the shoulder of the bullet, you're seated too long. If it's rubbed off the shoulder of the brass, you're not bumping your shoulder back correctly.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Anything else you can think of any advice that you have, just a parting shot for our first time reloaders?
The biggest advice, if you're thinking about doing it, just go ahead and do it. There's something therapeutic about a single stage press. If most people listen to your show, and guys like us, we're all wired the same. And there's always a lot of people that are willing to help. And I don't mind ever answering questions for people. I don't, even though I'm running a business, I like helping people and seeing people successful too. Just make sure you're doing things correctly. Ask lots of questions, and shoot straight.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for coming on the show and sharing some knowledge and your experience with us. Where can people find you if they want to take one of your classes, if they want to get in touch with you or learn more about North Texas Rifle Precision? Sure.
My number is 972-824-8832. Again, it's Josh Ruby with North Texas Rifle Precision. If you Google that, you'll see the webpage. Also on Facebook, I've got a Facebook page that I put a lot of information out on. I also do a lot of teaching at a place called ETTS down in Waxahachie. It's a 1,200-yard range that I teach on. So if you see a truck with rifles and NTRP'd on the side of it, that's me. So grab me and say hi, and we'll shoot.
I'll do that. All right. It's NorthTexasRiflePrecision.com.
Yes, sir.
All right. Good deal. Thank you, Josh. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Had a good time.
Thank you. And that is going to wrap it up for another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. Thank you for listening. Keep shooting, keep praying, and we'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.com. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @ArmedLutheran. And like us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/thearmedlutheran. You can contact us by email at armedlutheranradio@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 855-54-ARMED. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.